You probably won't believe this, but I once thought I had a perfect relationship. He was always sweet, caring, and made me feel like I was the only one. But just one casual comment from an old friend at a party made everything come crashing down. A truth I never knew, a past I never expected, changed everything. Can I forgive him? And will this relationship ever be the same after everything that's happened? When I first met him, I thought I had found the perfect man. He was gentle, polite, and always made me feel special. He was a friend of my brother, someone I had known since I was little. My relationship with my brother was always very close, so I felt comfortable when he brought his friends over to our house. The whole group of my brother's friends was very respectful toward me, always laughing and joking without ever saying or doing anything that made me uncomfortable. My brother's group of friends had been very tight-knit during college, but after graduation, everyone went their separate ways. They didn't see each other much, but one day, after many years, they decided to gather again and relive old memories. That meeting took place at my house. When they arrived, the atmosphere at dinner was lighthearted, filled with laughter. I was so happy to see my brother's friends again, and they all seemed friendly and jovial. However, things started to change when one of my brother's friends began talking about me. He was the type who liked to joke around a lot and usually had everyone laughing. We were sitting at dinner when he suddenly said, "Wow, your husband is really lucky that this relationship worked out. Who would have thought she'd actually agree to marry him?" Everyone in the room laughed, but I felt an uncomfortable feeling rising inside me. I looked over at my brother and my husband, both of whom seemed tense as if they didn't want this conversation to continue. I was curious, so I asked again, "What's going on? What are you talking about?" And that was when everything started to unravel. The friend, with a look of satisfaction on his face, continued, "I remember when your brother first introduced us to her. She seemed so arrogant, like she thought she was smarter than everyone else. He even said she was a loser who needed someone to teach her a lesson." At that moment, I was completely stunned. It felt like time had frozen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to look at my husband, and I saw that he was tense too, unable to say anything. I could tell he was trying to stop his friend from continuing, but it was too late. What I had heard wasn't just a harmless joke, it was the painful truth I had never known. My brother, the one person I trusted like family, had told his friends that I was arrogant and deserved to be put in my place. A wave of anger and betrayal hit me, like a storm. I couldn't process everything fast enough. I just remained silent, trying to hold back my emotions, and awkwardly laughed. After the dinner ended, all I wanted was to retreat to my room and not see anyone else. My husband followed me into the room, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He apologized and assured me that he was no longer that person, that he had changed and didn't think like that anymore. But in that moment, I couldn't hear him. All I felt was betrayal, and the realization that everything I had thought was real was built on a lie. After the friend of my husband stopped talking, the atmosphere in the room became suffocatingly heavy. All eyes were on me, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. The shock was overwhelming. For the first time in our entire relationship, I felt like I was standing outside my own life, as if everything around me was just a cruel joke. His words kept echoing in my mind, and I couldn't understand why my husband had stayed silent, why he let everything unfold like that. After dinner, I decided not to stay with the group. I went straight to our room without saying a word. When my husband followed me in, he started apologizing, but I couldn't listen. He said it was the past, that he had changed so much since we met, but I just couldn't shake the doubt. How could I trust those words when he had been a part of that story? He hugged me, telling me that he loved me and regretted everything that had happened. But I didn't feel anything, just emptiness. I looked at him, but I couldn't see the man I had fallen in love with. I didn't know if his apologies were sincere or if he was just trying to calm my anger. All I knew was that I felt betrayed, used from the very beginning. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. Everything in the house felt hazy, and I couldn't focus on anything. The memories of the times we had fun together, when he treated me well, now seemed distant and filled with doubt. His words, what he had said about me to his friends, felt like a wound that couldn't heal. I didn't know if I could ever look at him the same way again. He kept calling and texting me, but I didn't respond. I just wanted some space to think. But what hurt me even more was my brother's silence. He, the one I had always seen as family, the one who knew exactly what had happened, said nothing to defend me. Instead, he let everything continue, even being the one who started the whole story about me with his friends. I couldn't forgive him. I couldn't believe that someone I had always respected could hurt me like this. That whole day, I just wanted to leave, to go somewhere far away and find peace. But I didn't know what to do with this relationship. Could I continue living with someone I couldn't trust? Could I forget everything that had happened and start over? Or would I always live in the fear of being betrayed again? The next day, still feeling drained and upset after the tense conversation with my husband, a phone call from my mother-in-law made the situation even worse. She called to let me know that the family was organizing a small get-together and wanted me to attend. I didn't want to hear any more of this, but I couldn't refuse my mother-in-law, as she always had a way of making me feel guilty if I didn't attend family gatherings. However, inside, I was completely conflicted. My husband's family had always been a source of tension. They constantly made unreasonable demands about how I should dress, behave, and even made comments on my personal choices. I couldn't stand their control and constant criticism, especially when I was already emotionally drained. When I arrived, the difference was immediately obvious. From the looks of the family members to the subtle remarks about my decisions, everything made me feel out of place. They continuously talked about what I should do during my pregnancy, from what to eat, what to wear, and even how I should rest. Every piece of advice felt like a slap in the face, and I felt like a child forced to follow all their rules with no voice of my own. My husband tried to mediate, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He loved his family, and I understood that, but they never respected me. Every time he wanted me to join family gatherings, I felt this immense pressure weighing on me. I couldn't take it anymore. After that meeting, I decided I had to be clear with him about how I was feeling. I didn't want to continue living in a relationship where I was always trying to please everyone, especially his family, and never felt comfortable or respected. That night, my husband and I sat down to talk. I told him I couldn't tolerate his family anymore and that I needed some space. I didn't want them to be involved in every decision we made, especially now that I was pregnant. It felt like I couldn't breathe every time they were around. I knew they were his family, and I couldn't ask him to choose between me and them. But I also couldn't live in a relationship where I constantly felt like an outsider. My husband was silent for a long time, as if he was reflecting on what I had said. Finally, he looked at me and sighed. "I know my family has their ways, but I don't want you to feel like this," he said. "I will try to do something to make things less tense." However, I still felt doubt deep inside. I wasn't sure if he truly understood how I felt. He had grown up in that family, and it seemed like he was used to being controlled by them. Maybe I was asking for too much, but I couldn't continue in a relationship where my feelings weren't being considered. Even though he promised to try, I still felt a growing distance between us. Could we continue to live happily if he couldn't stand up for me in front of his family? In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time he brought up his family, I felt helpless, and the fear that I would always be an outsider in my own life grew stronger. After our conversation that night, I decided I couldn't continue living in this situation. The relationship between me and his family had become too tense, and I felt like I couldn't bear them any longer. This wasn't just affecting our relationship, it was making me feel like an outsider in my own life. The feeling became even more apparent when I realized that, while he loved his family, he had never truly stood up for me. The following days, I couldn't stop thinking about his words from the night before. He said he would try to make things less tense, but I wasn't sure if that was just an empty promise. I needed action, not words. I decided to make a very clear request. I didn't want his family involved in our decisions anymore, and I needed him to choose between me and them if he truly loved me like he said. The next morning while he was at work, I took some time to think about everything. I had compromised too much, been silent for too long, and now it was time for a change. I knew if I didn't stand up for myself, nothing would ever change. I sent him a message. We need to talk seriously. Today, just us. When he came home, I led him into the living room and started the conversation. You love your family, I understand that, but they always make me feel like an outsider. I can't live like this anymore, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm not asking you to choose between me and them, but if you want us to continue, I need to feel respected. And I need you to stand up for me, like I stand up for you. He was silent, his eyes full of worry. I could see he was really tense, as if he had to make a big decision. After a long pause, he looked at me and then lowered his head. I didn't think his family made you feel like this. I always thought everything was fine, but you're right, he said, his voice a bit choked. I love you, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure they don't interfere in our life anymore. At that moment, I felt a small sense of relief, but I still wasn't completely convinced. He said he would try, but deep down I had doubts. Would he have the courage to face his family and demand they respect me? I couldn't forget all the times before when he hadn't stood up for me. Would this time be different? Or would he slip back into his old ways, compromising with his family and leaving me feeling like an outsider? Either way, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't continue living in a relationship where I didn't feel loved and respected. And if he truly loved me, he had to prove it with actions, not just words. After our serious conversation, I decided to give myself some time to think. Although he promised to try to change and not let his family interfere in our lives anymore, I still couldn't fully trust him. Over time, he had said all the right things, but his actions never followed through. I knew he loved his family, but I couldn't continue living in a compromise that I always had to bear. A few days later, I decided not to attend any more family gatherings of his, even though it made me feel somewhat guilty. I understood that this might put him in an awkward position, but I couldn't keep accepting their intrusion into our lives. I didn't want to live in constant tension and feel controlled. I wanted to feel like I was part of his family, not an outsider always enduring and tolerating. My husband noticed the change in me, and he began to feel uneasy. He didn't directly say anything, but it was clear he was getting more anxious as time passed. One evening, while we were having dinner, he suddenly spoke up. You might feel that my family is a bit overwhelming, but I don't want to lose you over this. I don't know what to do to keep both my family and you in my life. I love you, and I'll try to change, but I also need time. I looked at him, my heart tightening. His words were full of contradictions, and I could see that he was caught in an internal struggle. He loved me, I knew that, but he also loved his family, and I wasn't sure if I could continue living in this state of uncertainty. I didn't want to be the one to create a divide in his family, but I also couldn't keep living in silence and tolerating everything. After that, I decided to be even clearer with him. You need to understand that I can't live like this anymore. I love you, but I can't always stand behind, giving way to your family, and feel oppressed. I can't continue in this relationship if you can't set clear boundaries with your family. My husband was silent for a moment, then sighed. I will try, but you need to understand that my family is an important part of my life. I can't cut ties with them, but I'll try not to let them affect us anymore. His words left me even more confused. Did he truly understand what I was saying? Would he be strong enough to stand up for me in this situation? Or would I once again have to endure these difficult days living in uncertainty and exhaustion? The feeling of unease and doubt resurfaced within me. Although I loved him, I couldn't live in a relationship where I didn't feel safe and respected. I just hoped that this time he would truly follow through on his promises and not let his family become an obstacle between us.